Hello, everybody. Steve Britton here, coming to you live, loud, proud, for real this time, from somewhere in southern Alberta. Took me a little bit to get figured out to get this thing up and running, but I am up and running now. It's working just fine. Thank you very much. So let's tune in to the Senate. And what I will say is a lot of what I've been hearing from the Senate has basically been the same old over and over again. These people are horrible. They occupied our city. If you're, they didn't go home when we asked them to go home, and yada, 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 yada. And so there we go. So anyway, so let's load up the Senate here.
COVID, about the COVID
Have a
vaccine issue for many people. It's interesting. This morning, I picked up my local paper in Nova Scotia, and in the page 2 of the paper, there's always a history section. And in today's history lesson for us, it's interesting. It says,
I haven't figured out what side this guy's on yet.
1954, the first mass inoculation against polio with the Jonas Salk vaccine takes place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Many of our younger
mass
people in this chamber
vaccinations.
probably have never seen polio. And the reason they've never seen polio is because of the vaccine. Because polio has almost been eradicated may have been eradicated in the world because of the vaccine. I'm frustrated that we're that people that we're not concentrating on that. We're all frustrated, but Canadians will get through this through the pandemic stronger, wiser, and safer than ever.
And maybe so, but we shouldn't have to be forced into vaccination, something that not everybody wants.
Senator Patterson, did you wish to ask a question?
Now, what are the things that
Senator,
has
I'd
come
like to
through
ask if
the...
Senator Mercer would please take a question.
Yes, sure.
Thank you for your speech, Senator Mercer. And I just want to say that I agree with what you said about the importance of vaccine mandates
control on the
in protecting the health of Canadians. I've said that particularly with reference to my home territory of Nunavut.
Now, one of the things that we've just heard, I just heard 5 minutes ago, was our illustrious Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, was about to make an announcement, something about revoking the Emergencies Act because the protesters had gone home. So what the hell is going on here?
To have imposed a vaccine mandate on truckers who had mostly done their challenging jobs alone.
Now, this guy said he's not convinced that it's the right way to go. This guy is actually a decent guy.
Been required.
And he is a Liberal senator.
80% of them being vaccinated at any event. So I'd like to ask you if you have any thoughts about whether imposing that vaccine mandate on truckers when 90% of them were reportedly vaccinated, and after letting them cross the border freely for the better part of 2 years, when we really needed their services and that produce they delivered, would you agree that that was an unnecessary and perhaps understandable provocation, that imposition of the mandate?
Imposing the mandate is always going to be
I think any time
a
you
problem.
Someone with a sharp stick, you can anticipate that there's going to be a bit of a pushback, and
there should be pushback. You should not force people into doing things ever.
Have all of the information that had the government use the sharp stick and poke the truckers on that case. I don't think we have all the information that caused them to do that.
All the information. What a bunch of BS.
In retrospect, was it a wise thing to do? Probably not.
What we know is that the vaccine doesn't work, and we also know that if you could still pass COVID around with the vaccine, so it's pointless.
On the motion for confirmation of the declaration of emergency that's before us. It's of great concern to me that the government is further extending, as it seems, its power without clear and defensible
how it sounds like.
In Canada, we hold our freedoms entrenched in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in the highest regard. The Charter ensures that Canadians are free to
Well,
express
that sounds really good.
their ideas as indicated
Okay,
in Section
so
2B, which states that
We've got
everyone
another
has the freedom of thought,
senator of
belief,
some
opinion,
point,
and
some
expression.
button here,
In Section
saying
C, which
something
refers to the
about
freedom of
someone
peaceful assembly,
at
and
some point
Section
in
D,
time.
freedom of
And while this
association.
is going through the motions here, I'm going to
Canadians
see if I can
therefore enjoy the
find
freedom to
anything from
express their
Justin
ideas,
Trudeau.
to gather and discuss them, and to communicate them widely to other people.
So
These
let's
are crucial to the proper and basic functioning of a free and democratic
see
society.
what we come up with.
It is equally fundamental that all Canadians are free to discuss matters of public policy.
We have to be free to
Demonstrate and
discuss matters of
criticize
public
governments.
policy. Yes.
There is no doubt that what happened on the 1 kilometer stretch of Wellington Street in that 3-week period was a protest, albeit not in accordance with the law of the land.
Not in accordance with the law of the
I've
land.
received
It was
an
very much so. They
unprecedented
kept a
number of phone
lane
calls
open
made
so
by
traffic could get
Canadians
through the
of all
whole
walks of
time.
life and all provinces and territories to express their sincere and legitimate fear that their fundamental liberties they cherish are being eroded and in some cases removed. I know that you colleagues
Instead
have
of
received these
talking
messages
about
as well-
removing the
as well.
freedoms, give them
I know
back.
some of these people because they have my private email and cell number, and they've reached out to me directly because they know me. Despite what some have said, these people are not racists, misogynists, or any of
got
the
that right.
convenient labels that are used to justify.
And it's
actions,
absolutely
including voting on
unconscionable,
this motion.
unconscionable that
Canadians
the
are
prime
truly
minister of
worried
this
that
country
invoking the
would go
Emergencies Act
so
was
far
not-
as to
was not
declare
necessary to
these
end the
people
protest in downtown Ottawa.
racist,
It
misogynist
certainly
members
wasn't
of fringe
necessary
minority,
to
when in
alter the
actual
border. It was
fact,
ended not
it is the
by
fringe minority
application of the
that support
Emergencies
these
Act,
mandates
but
to
by the
begin
legitimate
with.
local organizers who shut it down when guns
And you
and
don't go
ammunition
around
smuggled in
calling
were
your
discovered by
enemies or
police.
your political
Canadians are
opponents
alarmed at the overuse of
nasty
power
names like this, especially when they're
that the
not
Prime
true.
Minister has used in
Having
invoking
a
the
having a
Emergencies Act
label like
instead of
that thrown
implementing or
on
at the
you,
very least exploring
it sticks,
the other
and it
options
sticks forever because
available.
someone is always going to
or
believe
doing
it
it
true.
because of the obvious
And what
failures
you end up
of local
having
elites
is a
that
situation
have
where
powers
you have
under
damaged
existing
that
laws already
person's
in place,
reputation potentially for the
dysfunctional
rest of their
governments at
life.
municipal, provincial, and federal level. What is worse, there's not even an explanation as to why these other options had even been considered. They all had reasonable paths.
There's all
and
kinds
they
of
all
alternatives
abdicated
that
their
weren't
responsibility. Colleagues,
weren't,
in order to truly understand
considered.
what our country and this chamber are facing at this moment in time, we must look at the impetus of the Emergencies Act. The Emergencies Act was introduced by Minister of Defense, Perrin Beatty, in the second session.
I haven't
of the
seen
33rd
anything
Canadian
from
Parliament as
Trudeau
Bill
revoking the order
C-77.
yet.
The bill received royal assent.
We'll just
on
keep
July
going and
21st,
we'll see what we come up with.
1988, in essence, replacing the War Measures Act. Parliament intended to provide more civil rights protections while ensuring there is less room for abuse of power than its predecessor, the War Measures Act. Several amendments were made to Bill C-77. One notable one is the definition of national emergency. The situation under which the act could be invoked was defined more restrictively to limit the broad use. According to Peter Rosenthal, Canadian-American professor and lawyer who wrote the new Emergencies Act 4 times the War Measures Act, close quote, published.
All right, now this
Manitoba
gentleman,
Law
I
Journal
didn't catch his
with
name
2
as when he
possible
was
conditions.
recognized by the
One which
chair,
was,
but he
quote,
seems to have his
seriously
head
endangers the
attached the
lives,
right way
health, or safety of Canadians,
because he is
and is of
definitely
such
opposing,
proportion or
by the
nature
sound of
as
it,
to exceed
the
capacity or
Emergencies
authority
Act.
of a province to deal with it, or, open quote, a condition which threatens the sovereignty.
Now,
of the
as I said, we're still waiting on confirmation
had
that
the
Justin
capacity
Trudeau
and the
is about
authority,
to
they
revoke
just
the
didn't use
Emergencies
it.
Act
The city of Ottawa
by
has
declaring it revoked, I guess.
According
After,
to
of
Noah
course, going
Mendelsohn
through this
Adler,
whole thing
General
of having the
Counsel
House
for
of
the Canadian
Commons
Civil Liberties
back him up,
Association, as you heard
support
Senator
him on
Fernandez
this
say,
along
the
party
said
lines,
the
and
Emergencies Act
completely
is clear. It has
destroying
to be a very
every
very
shred
serious
of
danger to the
freedom
life,
Canadians
health,
have.
and safety of Canadians that is completely
And now it's in the
overwhelming to
Senate,
provinces.
and we're just
Or it
waiting for
has
the
to be a
Senate to
serious threat
finish
to
up
the
their
territorial
debate on the
integrity,
issue.
security,
But
or
what the
sovereignty
hell is this
that
guy
Canada
thinking? He
does not
gets the House
already
of
have
Commons to
laws
support him,
address.
and then he's going to
Further
revoke it
explains
like
that
days later.
what
Like,
is-
talk about,
What is
not
it we mean by
knowing.
the rule of law? We want democratic laws
yes,
to address difficult situations, not emergency powers. that should
yes,
not be normalized.
it was,
Colleagues,
Mandy,
we
it was
have
just
laws
on the
in
floor of the
place.
Senate that
So
somebody
let's go to the
mentioned
act.
that
It states,
Justin
For the
Trudeau might
purposes of
be
this act, a national
revoking
emergency is
the
an urgent and
Emergencies
critical
Act. He was supposed to be
situation
doing
of
a
the
announcement in
temporary
about
nature
5
that,
minutes, and that
A,
was around 20 minutes
seriously
or
endangers
15
the
minutes ago
lives,
now.
health or safety of Canadians, and is of
So,
such
we'll see
proportions
what
or
happens.
nature as to exceed the capacity or authority of a province to deal with, or B, seriously threatens the ability of the Government of Canada to preserve the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada, and that cannot be effectively dealt under other laws of Canada. These protests that we have seen in Ottawa and pockets across the country do not meet this threshold. Are the lives, health, or safety of Canadians in danger to such proportions that exceed the capacity of current authorities and laws? No. Is the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of Canada threatened by these protests to the extent they cannot be dealt with under existing law? No. Protests are a fundamental tool in shaping many democracies around
Absolutely.
the world, and Canada is no exception. In fact, protests mark the birth of many of the world's democracies. Protests are typically organized and executed by a minority of people, but this does not lessen their importance. The Canadian Charter of
Still trying to
Rights and
get some
Freedoms
windows
is
open
not
on
a
my computer
protection
here.
for the majority or the minority. It is a protection for the individual, and it is a protection against the authoritarianism of the government. Canadians are concerned by the implementation of the Emergencies Act, which has restricted lawful and constitutionally protected protests in this country. The overreach is unacceptable. Given the outreach my office
Absolutely,
alone
it's
has received,
unacceptable. It
it's safe
should
to say
never
that
have been
millions of
brought in the
Canadians
first
do not
place.
approve. These citizens have been labeled as people with unacceptable views.
The
In fact, it was
unacceptable
here in this chamber
views
that I first
are the
learned
people
the
who
term
think that
othering and the damage that it is intended to inflict.
those opposed to the mandates have
This
the
is
unacceptable
exactly what
views,
has
as
been
this
done
guy
by
is
the Prime
saying.
Minister and his government. Fringe minority, misogynists, racists, Nazi sympathizers. This is no way to lead a country, and this is not responsible governing.
He's the
Colleagues, as I
worst
try to
prime
dissect
minister in
and
this country's
understand
history.
how the proportionality of this government's actions compares to limiting guaranteed protected freedoms of Canadians, I would like to read a section of the preamble of the Emergencies Act. Whereas the safety and security of the individual, the protection of the values of the body politic, and the preservation of the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of the state are fundamental obligations of this government. And whereas the fulfillment of those obligations in Canada may be seriously threatened by a national emergency, and in order to ensure
This was
safety and
not a
security
national
during such
emergency,
an emergency,
and he knows
the
it.
Governor and
This
Council
guy's a
should be
good guy.
authorized,
He's on
subject
the
to
right side of
supervision
the
Parliament,
issue.
to take special temporary measures that may not be appropriate in normal times. The Freedom Convoy was not preventing the government from executing the business of government.
Nor was it blocking
I would
traffic.
argue that the convoy's protest, as locally disruptive and illegal as it was, does not meet the threshold for a national emergency.
A
as
protest
defined.
is meant to be disruptive. That's why
Further,
it's a
anyone who
protest.
thinks that the MOU declaration of overtaking the governing of the country using the powers of the Governor General, the Senate, and a cabal of protesters, and using this as their
Looking
definition
for
of
the
sedition, is reaching pretty far down a rabbit
information
hole of
about him
make-believe.
revoking the Emergencies Act.
Given what has transpired in the last couple of weeks, I do not believe that invoking the Emergencies Act was
Okay.
warranted. The Ottawa demonstration was disruptive.
9 minutes ago, Global News was
Demonstration and
reporting
protest in their
that
very nature are disruptive.
I'll have to share the screen
I
here.
have seen hundreds during my time here in the Senate. Some involve one person quietly holding a sign, and some have involved thousands and are loud. All legal protests are protected and are an important function of our
Okay,
system of
I'm
government.
going to switch over. Here's
All
something
levels
from
of
Trudeau.
government have laws and tools available to them. None were used effectively, and the Emergencies Act was specifically not designed for the inaction of governments or police forces abdicating their respective responsibility. Yet that is exactly why the Act was invoked.
All right, so what's he going to be saying? Ask and ye shall receive. How's the sound? Okay.
Groceries for my family.
All right. I'm going to switch back to the Senate. It sounds like they are going to, where is it? Lost it here. And I'm going to have to set this up again because I've messed up.
You don't know who the few
All right.
bad actors are.
There's the
You
Senate
freeze
back.
every
This is a
account and
conservative
unfreeze them
senator
one by
speaking.
one when they can
And while
prove
that's
their
up, I'm going to see if
innocence.
I can find a public
Colleagues,
domain
that is
source for the
backwards law
press
in the
conference
most
here.
dangerous way. And that is what we have now. In Canada, by most measures, the greatest country in the world. The Emergencies Act was not conceived nor designed to be a safety net for clear failures of multiple jurisdictions, existing laws, or
All right. So I have found the appropriate tab. And let's see if I can pull this up now. I'm still learning. So let's just bear with me while I work this out because this is something brand new to me.
That the Emergencies Act is
All
no
right. So
longer in
now
force.
this is the other window. Now,
We don't
apparently
need to
the
have the
bank
Senate
accounts are going to be
vote for this.
unfrozen.
They are masters of their own house.
Bank accounts
They
are going to
may
be
want to begin a
unfrozen.
debate on
And
that. It's
but
up to the
any
Senate to
criminal
decide.
charges will still be in effect.
The parliamentary committee, as well as the investigation, are necessary, and they will.
So now
proceed
there's
with
going to
this.
be an inquiry as to the whole
Hello,
process
Mr.
as
Trudeau,
to
Milan
whether
Craig
it
from
is
La
even
Presse.
worth it.
Do you think that the police had the tools they needed, but didn't use them for several weeks?
So
Well, no. Quite
again,
the
I'm checking
contrary.
the
What
sound.
we
If there's
saw
any
for 2
sound
weeks
problems,
is that
let
the
me
police
know.
forces did not have the tools they needed to dislodge the protesters and this occupation, which was entrenched in Ottawa and Coutts and at the Ambassador Bridge. The invocation of the Emergencies Act, I think,
Okay, we got sound.
encouraged some
Excellent.
people to
Thanks,
leave.
Mandy.
and also
So
allowed police forces to put an end to the occupation.
what an absolutely stupid thing to do.
We were assured that police forces could use existing powers to prevent the
What an absolutely
the
stupid thing to
entrenchment
do. It was
of
completely
occupation,
unnecessary to
as
begin
we
with.
saw in the protests in Toronto, Quebec
So
City.
he declares this emergency to give the
In
police
your
extraordinary
meetings,
powers,
why wasn't
has them
this,
march their way
did
in,
when, the
jackbooted
trucks
and
arrived?
with their jack boots
Well,
and,
that's,
and
a
clubs and
question
shields
people
into
will be
Ottawa,
asking.
bust a
I'm
few
sure.
heads,
Marco, do
and
you
then
have,
now
any
that it's
comments?
done, he goes through the process of having the vote in the House of
Thank you,
Commons,
Prime Minister.
and
I'd just
then
like to add that
cancels the
all
whole damn
measures
thing. The most
which were
ridiculous thing I've
introduced with the
heard of.
Emergency Measures Act were temporary and effective in Ottawa, but even in Winnipeg today and along our border. Since the beginning, the government
What a
has
waste of
expressed the
time.
desire to use the Emergencies Act as a last resort.
Now, this was a first resort,
And
you
We
idiot.
wanted to withdraw it as soon as possible.
Bullshit.
First question, David Thurton, CBC.
Hi, Prime Minister. Do you still see the
Look at that
protest
diaper
camps
on his
outside
face.
of Ottawa as a threat?
Thank you, David. Let's be very clear.
I hate this man's
The
voice.
threat continues. We
What
do see,
threat? There is no threat.
whether
There
it's
never
social
was a
media
threat.
activity or people who continue to be, focused on protesting and perhaps
People have a right to
illegally
protest.
protesting that we need to be monitoring. But the acute emergency that gave rise to the invocation of the Emergencies Act.
There was never
10
any
days ago,
acute emergency. If it had
that
been an
there
acute
were
emergency,
occupations
It
so
would have been-
solidly implanted
They would have brought this in
that the police
January
didn't have
30th.
the kind of resources or tools available to dislodge them. That emergency is now over. We spent
And
the
that
last 2 days
argument is
hearing
completely
from law
destroyed
enforcement
by
and
every
from,
argument that
public
was
safety
raised in the House of
experts,
Commons when the House of
who
Commons was
reassured
debating.
us
Because people in the
that
House
the
of Commons
tools
were saying,
available to police to prevent
it may go
further
back. It may
occupations,
come
tools
back
that
if
were
we don't keep
used
this
quite
Emergency Act in
effectively
place.
by,
Well,
police
pre-crime.
services in cities like Toronto and Quebec City over the past weeks be sufficient to prevent, even as people continue to threaten to restore blockades or occupations.
Oh, wow. My viewers going,
it would be
getting
sufficient
increasing.
to use
I've
the
doubled my
tools,
viewership.
regularly
uh,
at hand for
because I'm getting
police
animated.
services to prevent further emergencies.
Further emergencies. There
So
never
you
was an
still
emergency.
see these camps as a threat, but could you elaborate a bit more?
You know what
Prime
the
Minister?
threat
Do you
is?
see it as a threat
You,
to
Justin,
public
are the
safety?
threat.
Do you see it as a threat to democracy? Do you see it as a threat to Canadian values? Just if you could elaborate, that'd be great.
I think people understand that there was
Canadians value
a
freedom.
lot of anger and a lot of frustration directed at governments, directed at our democracy, directed at
And
public
the
health measures
mandates.
that were part of these blockades and these occupations, and those haven't ended. But allow me to be very clear: people are allowed to express their disagreements.
Apparently they're
People
not.
Will always have the right to free expression. Always have the right to freedom of
Apparently we
assembly
don't.
in this country.
Free for me, but
What
not
you
for
don't
thee.
have the right to do is to blockade your fellow citizens
Nobody was
to cause
blockading
pain
their fellow
and
citizens.
disruption in the daily lives of thousands upon thousands of Canadians, to put jobs
They
at
supported
risk
it.
across southwestern Ontario and indeed the whole country.
Most people
That's
supported
not a
it.
right people have, and that is something that we're going to continue to be very strong and vigilant against.
Moving on to Emily Bergeron, La Presse Canadienne.
All right,
Good
I can't
afternoon, Prime
stand.
Minister.
I'm gonna throw up if I
We've been
keep
hearing this
watching
since
this guy. So I'm
yesterday.
gonna turn him off. I can't. I just can't stand him. Okay, so there you have it. After a whole week of after 3 weeks of protesting in Coutts and in Windsor and in Ottawa, a convoy which came across the country that everybody knew was there. There was never a secret at all as to whether or not this convoy was coming and what they were planning on doing, because they told you what they were planning on doing when they started coming. Justin implements this Emergencies Act, and then once the Emergencies Act is implemented, what does he do? He has a vote in the House of Commons, gets his little pat on the back from and his friends and colleagues. He's got Jagmeet Singh on his knees in front of him, performing. I'm not going to say it. And then 2 days later, after a day of debate in the Senate, where all these nasty things were being said about the protesters in places like Coutts, including one senator who had the absolute gall to stand up and say that they came up with 3 trucks or 3 trailers absolutely filled with firearms, which, by the way, is complete BS. I'll see if I can find an actual photograph of the firearms and the weapons that were seized here. Yes, weapons were seized in Coutts. That is true. I will grant you that. Okay, firearms. I love being able to search on him at Coutts, but firearm by extreme elements of society. No, it wasn't extreme elements of society. It was a few people. They arrested 11 people who had come in unwanted and unannounced, because everybody from beginning to end said, we want this to be peaceful. We want this peaceful. Okay. And that means no weapons, no use of force, no acts in any way, shape, or form that are. That's the wrong. I'm on the wrong page here. No actions in any way, shape, or form that would be There we go. Well, okay. Here's a. I just found a web page here with the information I'm looking for. So we're going to pull this up, and I'll show you a photograph of the weapons that were found in Coutts. Right there. You see it? There we go. Right there. That there. There is your trailer. There is your truck. There is your full to the brim, stuffed full of weapons and ammunition and all kinds of horrible things that was such a big danger to everybody in Canada. There's your revolutionary gear. That's going to overthrow the Canadian government from more than 3,000 miles away. That's how far away Coutts is from wherever, from Ottawa. Yeah, so there you go. That's what they seized. And yes, those weapons should not have been there. I will grant you that. And I will grant you that it was a very stupid thing to have them. I will grant you that. And in actual fact, I wanted to, because I was involved in this. I was down in Milk River. I was saying to people, don't bring weapons. And I told the organizers, if you should put out an announcement saying, if anyone is caught with a weapon, if we find anyone who has a firearm, they will be turfed out. And if it is illegal, as in a restricted weapon that you're not even supposed to have with you, then we're going to report you to the police. Do not bring them. We are not going to condone violence. We are not looking to violently overthrow the government. We are here to cause a disruption, to block the traffic until such time as we get what we're demanding, which was end the mandates. And what happened after these guys were arrested, of course, is it completely undermined any credibility of the protest, because there's it's one of those things. If you throw enough shit at something, some of it's gonna stick. So they, of their own choice, of their own volition, the protesters in Coutts and the protesters in Milk River cleared the highways, and they moved, and they've got themselves a site that is off to the side and is not blocking any traffic. And it sounds, and it's just ticking over. It's doing its thing. There was a protest yesterday in Edmonton as well at Alberta's legislature. That seemed to go really well. So there you go. Now, as I just wrap up here, I have a question here from Ilan, my good friend Ilan, who's in a Signal chat, and he says, thoughts on Rex Murphy. I know of Rex Murphy. I've liked him. I've also hated a lot of what he said. He's a very good speaker, and he, I couldn't put a pin on him. I couldn't peg him on either side of the spectrum. I have no idea what he believes, and I think that's probably works in his favor, because one of the premises is, if everybody is mad at you, you're probably doing something right. So, take that for what it's worth, Alon. So now they've revoked the Emergencies Act, by the look of it. Thank heavens for that. It's done. They should never have invoked it to begin with. And this whole debacle has now come to an end. And whether or not the truckers are going to regroup and reorganize remains to be seen. Personally, I hope they do. But that's my opinion. And there you go. So I'm going to drop off here because I've pretty much covered everything that I intended to cover. It did not cover nearly as long as I thought it was going to be covered. Sandy Paws. Sandy Paws says on Signal here, just before I wrap up, bet they'll keep accounts frozen and folks in jail, though. Well, Sandy, what they said is that the bank accounts are now in the process of being unfrozen. Any bank accounts that were frozen, that is. And also any criminal charges that have arisen from this will remain in effect. And so you've still got the Ottawa Police Service saying, we're going to come after you no matter how long it takes. We're going to get you. You've got the RCMP, who basically stood back and let these jackbooted thugs do what they wanted to do. Although there were people bragging about, running people over with horses and such in the in an RCMP chat. I know that there's a lot of discord, not the discussion and debate between Canadians over whether or not a lot of what was accused. Well, that's something I am going to cover before I go. Actually, I just realized this. I was having a debate with someone on Facebook regarding the events in Ottawa. And what this lady said to me is her mother had been threatened and harassed for wearing a mask because her grandmother, rather, works in healthcare. And this grandmother had been harassed for leaving with a mask. And apparently there had been a fire set in the lobby. I don't know how much of this is true and how much of this is embellishment. However, first of all, to do this is wrong, right? I had a CBC reporter tell me when I was down in Milk River that somebody had spit on her, but she wouldn't tell me where and wouldn't tell me when. Take that for what it's worth. Now, here's what I will say, though. Anecdotal evidence isn't. Let me repeat that. Anecdotal evidence isn't. And what I mean by that is, to you, when it is someone that you care about, someone that you love, providing this anecdotal evidence, then that carries more weight. So if somebody says, well, my aunt was ended up in a coma with severe myocarditis because of the COVID vaccine, then that evidence to that person carries much more weight than it does with someone who doesn't know this aunt of this person, because they're a relative. So when it comes to, anecdotal evidence will always carry more weight for the person sharing the anecdote. But on the grand scheme of things, on the wider scale, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the norm. What it means is it happened within my family. That's what it means. So take that for what it's worth. And just because one person says that, they had been harassed for wearing a mask doesn't mean that all the protesters were harassing people for wearing masks. In fact, there was a lot of people who were wearing a mask, A, because it was cold, and B, because they didn't want to be identified. And can you blame them when all this bullshit is going down? All right. Happy birthday to me. So, everyone, I want to thank you all for tuning in. I just went 2 minutes longer than I intended. What do you know? And, hopefully I'll be able to get myself less hot under my collar and get back to what I was supposed to be doing today, which was not live streaming, actually. So, anyway, thanks for tuning in, everyone. See you next time. Or you'll see me. I won't see you because all I can see is a TV screen and a camera. Well, you know what I mean. Talk to you later.